Welcome back to Edge of Intelligence, where we explore how AI, automation, data strategy, and leadership converge to deliver business impact. I'm Carl Owen, a fractional CIO and AI advisor with Pertelligent. Today's guest is Jon Morris, founder and CEO of Fiscal Advocate Incorporated, a technology-enabled professional services company that helps service-based firms turn financial data into strategic insights and growth. Jon previously built one of the largest independent digital agencies, so he brings both entrepreneurial grit and scale-up experience. We'll talk about how he thinks about insight-driven business models, the role of technology in financial planning and analysis, and how leaders in service businesses can move beyond spreadsheets into decision systems. Jon, first off, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Carl. Great to be here.
You've had an interesting journey from building a digital marketing agency to founding Fiscal Advocate and creating the EngineBI platform. Can you tell us about how that journey began, what gaps you saw in the market, and how that led you to create Fiscal Advocate?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back even before Rise Interactive, which was the digital agency, to net traffic. I was 22 years old. I applied to every major consulting firm as I'm trying to graduate college, made it to the final interview and got rejected by every firm. So 22 years old, graduating college, didn't have a job, really didn't know anything about computers, but I was nerdy enough that people thought I knew something about computers. So I created a computer company. And in January of 1996, to age me, I saw this thing called the internet. And I was like, well, that seems kind of cool. And so I started building these ugly websites, like the ugliest websites you've ever seen. And people get in and ask me, well, um, you know, how's my website going to get found? And the answer should have been, well, this website's awful. You don't want anyone to find it. But instead, I started researching all the ways to market a website and truly was one of the pioneers of digital marketing. And so that turned into net traffic, which grew for a few years, but wasn't very well run by me and became a .com casualty. And so I then went to business school and I entered an annual business plan competition. And I took second place in the competition, and that's how Rise Interactive was formed. And I took all the mistakes I made, which were really financial mistakes and HR mistakes, and applied that to Rise Interactive. And I grew Rise from that $10,000 prize money from the competition to almost $40 million in revenue before exiting 5 years ago. And the secret to our success was our decision making and how we leveraged financial data to really focus on how to grow faster, how to be more profitable, and how to grow cash. And so when I exited, I really didn't know what I wanted to do next. And I had a business coach, and that coach would meet with us every 3 months to do quarterly planning. And he kept on saying every 3 months for multiple years, the insights that you guys have is like nothing I've ever seen. Like you could create a business just selling those insights. Hence, Fiscal Advocate was born. And Fiscal Advocate now helps mainly service-based companies, specifically in the tech service and the marketing service segment, where we teach them how to get more money into growth. So, how do you get more money into AI? How do you get more money into sales and marketing? By leveraging your financial data. So that's a little bit of my journey of how I got to where I am today.
Wow, that's quite the transition, and I'm sure it's full of a lot of lessons learned there. What were some of the biggest financial insight blind spots you encountered as an agency leader? Ones that you now help your clients avoid.
Yep. So I happen to be, if I had to take like my superpower, I'm a very good listener. And so I would meet with a lot of people who were senior to me, who've been there and have done that. And I got to learn all the benchmark numbers of what an agency should use in terms of how they run their business. And the first number, like that is, in my opinion, probably the most important number to know is your gross margin. And let me just give a little bit of definition. If you take your revenue minus all of your expenses that relate to doing client work, including people, is your gross profit. And if you take your gross profit divided by revenue, you want to be between 50 and 60%. Most people I talk to that are in the service-based space have no idea what their gross margin is, how to calculate it, and most importantly, when I finally do the analysis for them, their gross margin is too low. And so I just was going to share a few benchmark numbers. You get 50% of the revenue to deliver for your customers. You get 30% of the revenue to invest in your business, and then you get 20% for profit. That's like what you're trying to get your business to. But if you're not at 50%, you're at 35%, and you're still spending 30% of your revenue to like grow your business, you're only making a little bit of money. And oftentimes people are spending over 30%. They might be spending 40%, and so they're losing money. And so by understanding these numbers, and there's not that many numbers to know, but once you know them, you can make really cool strategic decisions about where to invest. What I ultimately want to do is get as much into sales and marketing and get as much into R&D as possible. Those are the two buckets I constantly am analyzing. How do I spend more money in those areas?
How did your experience scaling a service business inform how you built the EngineBI platform and the services model at Fiscal Advocate?
Yep. So I'll start with EngineBI. EngineBI is a budgeting and forecasting and benchmarking tool specifically designed for service-based companies. And when I was at Rise, I had the Google Sheet version of this software. And so it was how I used my business to run my company. And I've now automated it and I've built all sorts of functionality. And so that was the premise behind this is I'm trying to teach other people this path to success. And now I'm giving them the tools that go along with it. And I actually have a new tool coming out that'll come out in Q1 of next year, which is an AI CFO Copilot. And basically just think of it as like ChatGPT, but for any question for service-based companies about their revenue and their expenses. So when I say revenue, their existing clients, their prospective clients, their quota by individual, like any question you have on revenue, and then the expenses, people, freelancers, vendors, any questions you have in that area as well.
Cool. And when will that be out?
Should be Q1 of next year.
Well, when service businesses talk about growth versus profitability, what do you say is the real lever they often overlook?
So it's going to start with gross margin. So people used to ask me all the time that were competitors of mine, but much smaller when I was at Rise. And they're like, how'd you do it? And I'd be like, well, let me ask you a question. What percent of your revenue do you spend on sales and marketing? And the answer I typically got is, I don't spend anything. It's all word of mouth. And you have to remember, I owned a marketing agency and they owned a marketing agency. So my response will be is like, how come I'm the only marketer that actually believes in marketing? And so we spent as high a percent of possible of revenue on sales and marketing. Just to give you some benchmark numbers, the average company that is in the service-based industry, so whether it's a law firm, an architect, an engineer, a marketing agency, a tech service company, is 8% of their revenue is on sales and marketing. So if that's the average, half are spending more, half are spending less. We wanted to be as high as possible. Like, could we get to 20%? We wanted to crush that metric. Now, how do you fund it? So let's just start with gross margin. When I left Rise, our gross margin was 57%. That gave me 7 percentage points more than the benchmark of 50%. And most of the people I work with are well below 50%, even when I start working with them. So that's one way you can fund it. The other one is there's two other buckets in your non-client related expenses. One is your back office, so like HR, legal, corporate IT, general admin, and finance. You get 15% of your revenue there. But if you could get that down to 12, that's 3 more percentage points. Your executive team, which is generally your CEO, a president, any executive assistants, ancillary clubs and memberships, you get 7% of your revenue. If you can get that down to 6 or 5, you get another percentage point. So that's how you can manipulate the income statement. And then there's another way, which we use quite a bit, is you can take a private equity approach to running your business. And what I mean by that is a service-based company should have 20% EBITDA. And if you are lower than 20%, you're investing in the business. Even if you don't know what you're investing in the business. You're not at the benchmark numbers. we would oftentimes target 5% over 20%. So that's 15 more points that I could put into sales and marketing and I could put into R&D. And so that's how you can leverage these financial data to figure out how you fund growth between innovation and sales and marketing.
Interesting. So, how do you frame the value proposition of going from reactive financials to proactive insights for your client?
I generally come across two types of clients. One type of client is the cash distressed client. They took on debt or they've not been running profitably and they just literally need a turnaround so that someone can get their financials in order. Uh, the hard part in that scenario is, can I come up with a model where I can get paid and also turn them around at the same time and make sure that my prices are reasonable? So that's one group. The second group are the people who hit a plateau. They grew themselves to 10 million in revenue, or they grew themselves to 20 million in revenue, or whatever number they grew themselves to. And all of a sudden, they just can't figure out how to grow any faster. And so if people are willing to listen to me, I will show them the path to doing that. And, the other thing that I'll tell you, though, is the path is not always easy. If you're at a 40% gross margin and we want to get you to 50, generally means you have too many people or you have too many senior people. And so we have to make a cost adjustment to get the money to help fund your growth. And that takes a certain level of emotional strength to make those decisions. So what's good for the business oftentimes is not easy to do.
Well, you talked about your failings when you first started and how you've learned from
Yeah.
that and used those to grow your new companies. So, what is the mindset shift that you try to drive in leadership teams when you take them from telling accountants what to do to telling the business what to do with the numbers?
Yeah, so let's just talk about a little bit about my failure. So I mentioned HR as an example. Are you a sports person at all?
Absolutely.
Okay, what's your team?
Alabama
Okay.
football. Alabama football.
And have you ever sat there and either yelled at a game or yelled at the TV screen of like, why is this person on this team or why are they starting?
Every
So
week.
every week. So I find the same thing happens in business where you have C and B players and the manager does not make the tough decision. And so when I started Rise, for the longest period of time when net traffic failed, I blamed the dot-com crash. I had like this whole saying of the pendulum didn't swing the other way, the pendulum was cut. I can't tell you how many times I said that dumb line. And the reality is I easily could have survived if I had better financial stewardship and was willing to make the tough decision and replace people who were not A players and put in A players. And so I vowed I wouldn't make that same mistake going forward. And so I have a saying, which is nothing is more important than your direct report. And if you have a C player, you need to get rid of them. And if you have a B player, you have 60 days to turn them into an A player or you have to get rid of them.
So you use the top grading approach to do that?
Very similar. Yes. I like the top grading approach for interviewing, but I'll give you a real good example. Something top grading wouldn't figure out is I put a massive emphasis at Rise on analytical ability. And I had like this perfect scorecard, and me and the chief operating officer would sit there and interview people, and we look at our grades and be like, this person's amazing. And I'll tell you what they were amazing at, convincing me they were analytical when they weren't. And so we created an analytics exam. It had a 22% pass rate. And every once in a while, it started off with people would interview and then I would give them the exam. And every once in a while, someone would like just do amazing in the interview. And then they'd fail the exam and I'd give them a shot anyway because they did so well in the interview. And what I found was the exam was a better assessment than that individual's interview capabilities, And so we switched it. And in order to interview with us, you had to pass the exam first before you be able to talk to us. I'll tell you, like one of the interview questions I ask every manager, I was like, how many people report into you right now? Let's just say it's 5. And I'm like, okay, I want you to grade every single person in an A to F scale. So they'd be like, Sally's an A and Billy's a B and Noah's an A, and, et cetera. And I'd be like, well, why is that person who's a B on your team still? And that's the methodology I would use to hold people accountable as a manager is, just to make it clear. My expectation is if you're a manager, you're going to have all A players and that you're not going to rest and relax until you do.
Well, doesn't the bar continue to go up though? When you have all A players, you kind of have to reset, right?
Not necessarily, like if you have all A players, there's a difference between being an A individual contributor and an A manager. There's a big difference between Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, right? And so, uh, if I have a manager, they need to be an A player as a manager. If I have an individual contributor, when I say A player, I mean for the salary you're giving them. I'm not expecting if you're hiring someone as an entry level role that my expectation is that they're the caliber of the CEO. But I am expecting that relative to all other entry level players, that they're in the top 10% and that they're performing really well.
Yeah, I used to work for a gentleman at Wachovia when I was there, and we were really big on the high performing teams and the top grading
Yeah.
methodologies and all that. So I'm very familiar with all that. You position Fiscal Advocates as a tech-enabled firm helping professional services companies with FP&A, strategic planning, and software with the EngineBI.
Yeah.
It's a convergence of people, process, and platform. How did you decide which functions to embed in technology and which to keep as advisory services?
So it really started off, once again, when I started this company, I started off with Google Sheets. And so those became my prototypes of what to build. I'm continually, thinking about new things and new features of what's the most value. I'll give an example. One of the things that we're really working on is a report builder, which doesn't sound very exciting, but we want you to be able to slice and dice your data. We want you to be able to put board decks together. We want to be able to send emails. We want to have notifications on your phone that you can see the data where you want it, when you want it, how you want it. And right now, we provide that through PowerPoint presentations, or Google Slides, and that's a massive amount of time. So we're looking at what are the key things that, that we can improve upon. And I'll give you a real good example. Jeff Bezos, when he was running Amazon, came up with two things that he talked about in his customer success approach. No one will ever be upset about getting something faster, and no one will ever be upset about getting something cheaper. And it's the same thing with when you're running the finances. No one will ever be upset that they can get their data faster and in the format they want. It's just a matter of how do you do that? Hence the reason we built Luca is now if you're up in the middle of the night, Luca's our AI CFO copilot. If you're up in the middle of the night, you'll be able to ask a question without having to wait to talk to an analyst, and ideally this will be better than your analyst because, it's got the power of AI behind it.
What are some of the biggest tech infrastructure risks you see for service firms today when it comes to financial planning and insight delivery?
So really staying relevant, things are moving so fast and every day there is a new product that promises to do something. And every major platform now has some AI agent that's attached to it. And so, we chose to not go embrace other people's platforms and just be power users of that. We chose to be our own tech-enabled company. And that's a risky proposition when you consider the amount of VC money, the amount of capital, the amount of investments that pure, major tech platforms are investing in.
In your model, what role does AI or automation play today versus where you see it heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
So we're in the infancy stage, but I'll give you my whole philosophy on where people are when it comes to AI. So we have invested very heavily in an AI CFO copilot. That's been our entire roadmap for the last 6 months. The product is about to go into beta. It's going to launch in January or Q1 of next year. And so, we've invested very heavily in the training. Gemini is the platform we chose that powers us behind the scene. Google has been amazing in terms of giving us guidance in terms of how to build this technology. Our entire roadmap is AI driven. So we are in our infancy in the sense that the product has not been launched yet, but this was the year that we really transitioned towards building something with AI. We also took an AI first approach in terms of all of our development. So our team is using Cursor, and we're constantly evaluating new tools to make sure that we are forward thinking in our processes. A lot of my marketing is leveraging AI in terms of content development and outreach. So it is permeating throughout the company. But here's how I know when somebody is real or not real when it comes to AI. So I'm going to go back to Rise. I'm going to tell a quick story, and then I'm going to transition that to the world today. When we were small, like 15 to 20 people at Rise, I would walk the hallways and I would see an employee and I would stop them in their tracks and I basically ask them a bunch of questions. I was like, what clients are you working on? What are you doing for those clients? What are their goals? A whole bunch of questions. And, I'm on client ABC. We're doing SEO and paid search for them. And I was like, cool. What did you do for SEO last week? Oh, we restructured their title tags. We signed a keyword to every single page. We refactored the code so that it loads faster. They give me all this detail. I was like, great. And what did you do for paid search? Like, oh, we optimized their account last week. And what I found was people love to give you the details of what they're working on. And if they say they optimized their account, that was code for, I don't want to tell the CEO I did nothing, but I did nothing last week for that account. And I find it is very similar when I ask people what you're doing for AI. We put an AI committee together. We have an AI task force. We hired a guy to do AI for us. We're starting to talk to vendors. We put a budget together. All that means that you've done nothing because people love to share the details. I can tell you that in a very few months, in a short period, we have built an AI CF Copilot. We're right now working on training the LLM. We have this really cool vision for how we're going to be able to share agents and have people participate at the exact same time. We are connecting QuickBooks to Luca right now. Like I could go into details. We could spend this entire episode with me sharing you with roadmap items of what we're doing. And by the way, my list is 3 years long of what I want to do in very long detail. That's when I know someone is real when it comes to AI. That's what when I talk about helping people grow faster and increase their profits, and I talk about getting more money into R&D, I want it to be real. I want them to be hiring you, Carl, where they have a roadmap and they know exactly what they're going to be doing, and we've got budget for it, as opposed to speaking in this more theoretical world.
I've been on a lot of leadership teams where we all talk about dashboards, right? Everybody brings their dashboard to the executive meeting. But a lot of times they really don't produce any action out of it. So how do you ensure that insights produce that action that's needed? And then what governance or organizational design do you advocate with the leaders that you work with?
Phenomenal question. So I'm going to tell you another quick story that will get to your point in a second. There's a guy named Avinash Kaushik who is, I don't know if he still is, but for the longest period of time, he was the spokesperson for Google Analytics. And prior to going to Google, I think it was Intuit, but I don't know exactly the company, but it was a large company. He took over as the head of analytics for that company. And they had this platform called Web Trends, which is an enterprise level analytics platform. And the very first thing he did as the new head of analytics for this large company is shut it down. And he sat there and he waited for how long it would take before someone was calling at him and yelling because all of a sudden their analytics platform was shut down. And 3 weeks later, not a single phone call. So they were paying a crazy amount of money for an analytics platform that provided no value to anybody. So when you talk about insights and the fact that you've had these dashboards and they don't mean anything, it resonates with me. So the first thing is I'm going to help people focus on only 3 KPIs, only 3 KPIs that matter. You are welcome to challenge me and see if you could get a 4th. No one has been able to do it yet, but I'm going to tell you the 3 KPIs that matter. KPI number 1, how much cash you have relative to your monthly overhead. I want you to have in a savings account a minimum of 2 times your monthly overhead. Microsoft bought LinkedIn for $26.2 billion in an all-cash deal. When you have lots of cash, you have lots of optionality. So that's KPI number one. KPI number two, your profit margin. If you are running a service-based company, your profit margin should be 20%. If it is less than 20%, then you either know what investments you're making or you are overspending in a certain area. And the third one is your year-over-year revenue growth. The best of the best in a service-based company grows at 20% a year. Now, if you're really small, it might be a much higher percentage because going from $1 to $3 is 300% growth. And then if you're a $20 billion company, it might be the rate of GDP, because you're such a massive organization. But for the vast majority of companies, 20% growth is the magic number. Now, that's the starting point. And as you said, like you get dashboards and you grow. What I then want you to do is only go one level lower. Okay, so let's just start with revenue growth. Unless you're doing M&A, so if you're talking about growing organically, there are only three metrics. What is your retention rate? What's your upsell rate? And how much new business do you win? And so you then go from there. Then for new business, there's only four metrics that matter. It's what's your average order value, what's your at-bats, what's your win rate, and what's your sales cycle. And so I want people to look at the least amount of numbers possible to make decisions and simplify their business as opposed to having a dashboard of hundreds of different things. So now that we have a framework to making our decisions, the next thing you brought up is, do people actually make those decisions? My 5-year journey as a fractional CFO is it's mixed. Think about the service-based industry. Our inventory are people, and they're people we love, they care about, we've been in the trenches with, and 90% of my recommendations when it comes to adjusting costs is that you have to reduce headcount. And so do you have the emotional strength to make those decisions? And I find the answer is mixed. Some people it's yes, some people it's no. And I've told people this, don't hire me. So I'm not worried about giving you a dashboard that helps you make a decision. I'm worried about giving you a dashboard that helps you make a decision, but you don't have the strength to make the decision.
Most of my clients are small to mid-size businesses.
Yeah.
That rely on spreadsheets and gut feel.
Yep.
Today. Yeah, I think that's not going to say that's the majority of businesses out there, but it's certainly a large number. What's the first system or process you would ask them to implement if you were coming into one of those businesses?
So, a couple things. One, we need to reorganize your data to allow you to understand how much you're spending in certain areas. So, what percent do you spend on sales and marketing? What percent do you spend in your back office? What percent do you spend on your executive team? What percent do you spend in R&D? And what is your gross margin? Once we get that, so it's all about income statement analysis. Once we get that down, then we can start determining where you're under and over your skis. So that exercise is not that hard of an exercise, but that's the starting point of what you need to do to put yourself in a place to have a decent decision-making framework. And if you can do this in a year-over-year basis, you can start getting an idea of, are you trending in the right way? Are you not trending in the right way? So that's step one of all this. The only other step that I would say before that is that honest conversation of, do you have what it takes to make the tough decision when you see the data?
Scaling a technology-enabled professional services firm has its own set of constraints, right? It could be talent, process, data quality, delivery consistency, client outcomes. So let's dig into how you as a founder manage that. As Fiscal Advocates grows, how are you balancing bespoke advisory work versus standardized platform-led solutions?
So look, you want to standardize as much as you possibly can. So, if you look at our services, I'm just going to talk about our accounting services. There are 5 services: invoicing, AR, AP, payroll, and month-end close. Actually, media reconciliation, 6 services. That's all we do. Like, we do that day in and day out. Now, when you take invoicing, there's nuances. Sometimes if you're dealing with a mega client, you have to go into their platform to send out the invoices. But for the most part, we're following the exact same processes over and over and over again. When I get to our FP&A, it's budgeting and forecasting, cash flow analysis, monthly insights, resource planning, same type of thing. We're dealing with the same things over and over and over again. And so when you're dealing with a service-based company, you don't want to design and build something that is unique and different every single time. You really want to standardize your offering as much as you possibly can. So that's one element. I am fully guilty, by the way, of being in a pitch where someone wanted something that is like to the left of center of what we do, and I'll agree to do it. At Rise, I did that all the time when we were small, and I was able to have a vision and figure out how to do it myself. But as I got bigger, I was not able to do that anymore. I had to start standardizing and not selling anything that was out of the box. The second thing is where people run into a lot of trouble, and I get a lot of pushback on this, is we were growing fairly rapidly. We were adding $6 million in incremental revenue every single year. And we had to hire about 50 people a year. And I get people all the time that tell me that they just started saying no to prospective clients because they can't figure out how to serve this to capacity and make sure that they do a good job. The trick to our business was that we primarily focused on hiring entry-level employees, and we promoted from within. Where people run is like, we want them to only talk to senior people. Well, guess what? Clients don't want to pay senior people to do junior people's work. And the most of the work is junior people work. And so we built it like a machine where you got hired, you went through something called Rise Top, which was TOP was an acronym for training and onboarding program. It was a 2-week program. You got assigned to a client. Within 6 months, I knew exactly where you would be in terms of like your level of sophistication of digital marketing. There's a really, really steep curve in the first 6 months. It then leveled out. By year 1, you were really dangerous. You were a really good digital marketer. Year 2, you were an amazing digital marketer. And then we went to a 4-to-1 manager to direct report ratio. So if you started off as an IMC, was an entry-level employee, on your 1-year anniversary, almost without fail, you got promoted to senior IMC. And then after that, in order to become a manager, there had to be a position available. There were no more promotions because we went to a 4-to-1 ratio. And so unless someone quit, someone else got promoted, or that we needed a new manager, you weren't getting promoted. So we had a really good system of pushing people up and promoting them. And that was our secret to how we were able to scale and continue to take on clients. It took us 19 days from the time we opened up a position to the time someone accepted it. And so we knew those numbers really well also.
Wow. Data integrity, integration, real-time pipelines. Service firms often struggle with all of those. What have
Yep.
you seen as the biggest stumbling?
So I think it depends on what your service offering is, but data integration is a great one. When you are building technology and you want to integrate with lots of systems, it is just slow. Learning about an API, connecting to the API, cleansing all the data, determining how the data comes in, all that information. We spend a lot of time constantly thinking about different methods to bring in data and do it at speed and with high security and all those things. Right now we're evaluating, and I'm going to butcher the acronym, but I think it's Model Context Protocol. Is that the right name? Which is a method to potentially bring in lots of different data sources at a much faster rate. But that is a challenge, and what I generally tell people is, January is around the corner. To me, my favorite business day of the year is the first business day of the year. I call it game day. And I think game day falls on January 5th this year, which is a Monday. And there's a bunch of planning that goes into making sure that we're going to have an amazing year next year, and the season kicks off on January 5th. I want on December 31st of next year, my business to be better. And I'll give you an example. Luca, my AI CFO co-pilot, we know that connections is a big part of what we're trying to do. So in order to answer questions as it relates to revenue and expenses, we want to connect to your CRM. We want to connect to your accounting platform. We want to connect to your payroll provider. We want to connect to your time tracking tool. Like we have a whole series of things we want to connect to. And we have a small team, like a five-person team. For some people sounds big, but in reality, it's very small. And so we have to think about what's our strategy of how we can bring all that data in a fast way.
You're at the intersection of service business leadership, finance, and platform thinking.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for service businesses that want to stay relevant?
So it starts off with really identifying a differentiator. I, I'm going to give you what I call the two-question test. Question number one is what makes you unique? I typically find that when I ask a service-based owner this question, the answer is not great. It will be, we're data-driven, you get to talk to more senior people, we care more. I very rarely find something different than, let's just say, 5 or 6 different things. And I tell people, I don't really care what your answer is. I now want you to be able to answer the second question. I just met with 49 other companies that do exactly what you do. And they said that their differentiator is that they're data driven, or they care more, or you get to talk to more senior people. And so now what we need to do is explain, well, why are you different than those 49 other companies? And this is where having a really solid vision statement and budgeting to make your vision real is so important. At the end of the day, I want to help people improve 3 KPIs. I want to help them improve their cash, their profit margin, and their revenue growth. That's not rocket science. There's probably 49 other companies that say that they want to do that. What makes us unique is that we only focus on service-based companies. We know all the benchmark numbers. We're investing in technology to get those insights faster. We're constantly working at making it a bigger and bigger moat around just those 3 KPIs.
There's a lot of disruption out there today, particularly as it relates to AI. It's
Yep.
disrupting almost every industry. What do you see as the biggest disruption for service firms in the next decade?
I mean, I think it is AI, but I think you have to determine, are you going to be a disruptor or a disruptee? You know, if you're just using Chat GPT and being like, okay, I got an AI solution, you're going to get eaten up. If they really want to come up with a vision, and I think of AI as a tool. It's kind of like if I'm going to hang up a painting in my house, I need a hammer, right? If I'm going to change the way I work, I most likely need AI, but I want you to be focused on what you need AI for, right? I'm going to leverage AI for content development. I'm going to leverage AI for creating my proposals. In my case, we're leveraging AI to make our service offering better and faster so that you can get responses at a faster rate. So I want you to be solution based first, like the problem you're trying to solve. But then I want you to budget to use the tools that are out there that will make you do it better. And if you don't, then I think you're going to be in trouble. The only thing that I would say that you want to do next is, if you're not going to build the platform, is identify the platform that's going to grow at great scale, leveraging AI, that needs an integrator to make it work, where it might need your data to be organized a certain way, or that, like you need to get the most out of the tool. So those are a couple avenues, but if you don't have an AI first mindset and you don't budget for AI, then you're going to become irrelevant.
Agree 100%. For founders and CEOs listening who want to build durable businesses, what is your guiding principle when aligning people, process, and platform?
So first thing is, I want you to actually understand who you are and what you want to build. Okay, so if you want to build a large company, I want you to understand no goal will happen without budget against it. So as you're thinking about people, process, and platform, we've talked about people, only A players. As it relates to process, constantly simplify. How do you take more and more steps out of the way? I don't want you to have complexity. I want you to standardize and then automate. And then, in terms of platform, Whether you build your own, like, which is the path that I went down, but I mean, look, I leverage ClickUp, I use Pipedrive, I use a series of different tools every day. Is really make sure that you are got the right tools to do a job. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I had a neighbor a few houses ago who is by far the handiest person I've ever seen. And I was in my backyard and, he could look right into my backyard and I could look right into his backyard. There's like very little privacy. And he's got this tree house that is like the most professional looking tree house I've ever seen. Like, clearly he hired a carpenter to build this tree house. It's not like a typical, like sloppy thing that I would put together. Well, it turns out he built it. And I asked him, like, how do you do this? And he goes, look, here's the one secret that I always tell people when they want to build something is never try to make a tool that's the wrong tool fit to get a job done. Is if you're going to go build something, go buy all the tools that are necessary for you to do it in a great manner. And I feel like it's the same thing for business. As you think about the tools, are you jerry-rigging a bunch of Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel plus this thing plus that thing with bubble gum to hold it all together? Or are you investing in the tools that's going to allow you to do what you need to do?
If you could give one piece of advice to your younger founder self about this journey, what would it be?
It would be don't hire anyone but A players. It took me way too long to really realize the importance of that. I'm a sports guy. Soccer is my sport. And, I want all 11 players to be all-stars for their position. And I want the exact same thing for your business. And what I'd also say is if you're a small business, your first 10 employees are so crucial that you get it right. In 2006, when I was running Rise, I fired 50% of the people I hired. And you have to remember, I have no credibility. I didn't have a big exit or, I'm just this young guy and everyone thought I was nuts. But I knew exactly what I wanted. I just sucked at the interview process. My interview process was flawed.
What is your definition of success now? And I mean beyond revenue growth. And how do you measure it for yourself and your firm?
So I'm going to take separate between business and personal. On the business side, as the CEO of a company, I really do believe, that the financials are my driving force. I always tell people my boss is the income statement. And I deeply, deeply care for my employees and I deeply, deeply care for my clients. The most important thing I can do for my employees is grow the business. But by running Rise and having it be as successful as it was, I created a lot of careers and a lot of wealth for a lot of individuals. And I can't say I did, we did. We did as a collective. My guiding principles as an individual is to be kind, generous, and accountable. Have practically never missed a night putting my kids to bed. Rarely go out with friends. I've been married for 16 years. I haven't done a single guy's trip. I'm all in on my family and, weekends are completely devoted to them. When I had my first daughter, and Rise was blowing up in a good way and I'm working like crazy, crazy hours. My wife had a conversation of like, what type of dad do you want to be? And, I had a reflection of, I want to be a present dad. And it was hard to figure out how to do it because, you're transitioning like your life. But I made a decision that, when I'm going to be with my kids, I'm 100% with my kids. And, my version of work-life balance was I would put my kids to bed and then I would go back to work. Weekends were devoted to my kids, and to my wife. And so those are kind of my guiding principles.
That's powerful. If you could share one mindset shift that you believe every service business leader needs to make from a reactive to an insight driven mindset, what would it be?
The first thing is that soul searching on what is the worst part of your job? Okay. Every job has a worst thing to do. And you have to decide if you can do it. I'm going to give you an example. The president of the United States sends bombs into countries and kills people. I personally can't do that. Like I don't have the emotional strength to know that even if I'm making the world safer, that I might have made a wrong decision. The worst part of running a service-based company in my opinion, is that you're going to have to fire people, and they're people you love and you care about. And so that will be my first mind shift is don't do the job if you can't do the worst part of the job. The second thing is I'm a big believer in intensity. Is you don't necessarily have to work a lot of hours, but when you're working hard. And, quick story on this is I had an employee of mine who came from Discover Card. And I told him, I was like, I just want to warn you at Rise about our culture. It is nothing like you've ever seen. Like, it is highly intense. And he's like, John, he's like, don't worry, I'm the hardest working person at Discover. I was like, okay, I warned you, so come on board. So he joined the company. About a month goes by. And I'm like, so how's it going? He's like, you warned me about the intensity, and I didn't understand it until I was here. And he's like, I was truly the hardest working person at Discover, but if I ever wanted to go down to the speed of Discover, I could. Like, I could take a breather. He's like, when I take a breather at Rise, every single device I own blows up. Like, my emails are blowing up, my text messages are blowing up, my instant messenger is blowing up. I believe that if you want a high performance company, you need to build a culture similar to that, where people are on the move and they are making things happen in a really fast and aggressive manner.
Jon, let's pull it all together. For our audience of CIOs, CTOs, service business leaders, MSPs, MSSPs, and transformation execs, what should they walk away with today?
So I'll walk away with a few things. Putting you as the leader of the owners of these companies, the first one is understand what you want. Start with what I call owner's goals, which is, are you looking to go from 5 million to 6 million, or are you looking to go from 5 million to 100 million? Because those are very different types of businesses, and neither one is wrong. So you need to understand what you're trying to build. The second one is go back to understand the worst part of your job and make sure that you can do it. The third is simplify your business. Whether it's your finances, whether it's building technology, whether it's processes, the least amount of metrics you can look at, the better. And then lastly, I'd rather you make a mistake and make a decision than not make a decision. And so I'll leave it at those because I think those are good ones.
Now, you can always change later, but at least you've got a direction and you're moving forward.
Yep.
Well, Jon, this has been eye-opening, a clear reminder that growth isn't just about adding more clients and building smarter systems and insights and execution. Thanks for joining us and sharing your journey and frameworks. For our listeners who would like to find out more, where should they go?
So first of all, follow me on LinkedIn. I post every week a lot of information on best practices as it relates to finance and strategic planning. You can go to fiscaladvocate.com. Our resource section is filled with my ebook and a bunch of blogs and a bunch of information. And then email me. I'd love to hear from you at jon@fiscaladvocate.com.
This has been Edge of Intelligence. My guest today was Jon Morris, founder and CEO of Fiscal Advocate, where service business leaders are turning financial data into strategic decisions through technology and advisory. If you found value today, please share this episode, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a comment about the one metric you're going to track more closely this quarter. I'm Carl Owen. I'll see you next time at Edge of Intelligence. Thank you, Jon. I really appreciate it.
Carl, this was great. Thank you.